Hi, this is going to be the fifth and I think the last video in this series on schizophrenia and psychosis. And in this video, we're going to talk about hospitalization, particularly involuntary hospitalization. And that means that a person is taken to the hospital against their will, sometimes by force, and locked into the hospital. So this is a big deal. And it is a removal of a person's civil rights. And remember, they haven't committed a crime. A person can be involuntarily hospitalized in the United States for 3 reasons. Each one of these qualifies. You don't have to have all 3. So danger to self, typically that's when a person is suicidal, typically. And they might have a plan to kill themselves or that's the most likely. Danger to others means that the person is threatening other people and could harm them. And grave disability, that is a little more flexible. Typically, that means the person is so disabled that they can't really take care of themselves. And of course, it's due to a mental illness. And that kind of depends on the county and how many beds there are. I hate to say that, but when I worked in Santa Barbara County, we had very few beds available for involuntary hospitalization. And as a result, a person for grave disability, to hospitalize a person under the grave disability clause, I really had to ask myself on an assessment, if I leave this person or, if I don't, if they're not forced into the hospital, will they be able to keep themselves alive? So if a person is homeless and can get to a food kitchen or, has a tent or a place to sleep, that is not grave disability. So it would really have to be, sometimes if I went to somebody's apartment and they were so disabled that there was absolutely nothing to eat in the cupboards, that would be a sign of grave disability. Not because they were poor, but because they were too absorbed in their own world to stock the cabinets with food. Somebody who crosses the freeway without looking or thinking, just walks right out onto the freeway, because they're so absorbed in their own world and not noticing that they're on a freeway or, seeing themselves as being somewhere else. That would be grave disability. Standing on a street corner, talking to voices, yelling and swearing is not grave disability. Everybody has the right to have a mental illness, to talk to voices, to hear voices, to have their beliefs, as long as they don't meet one of these 3 criteria. Let's see if there's anything else I can say about this. Oh, your family cannot hospitalize you against your will. Your family can call for help and they can take you to the hospital, but it requires an assessment by a mental health professional certified by their county to actually initiate an involuntary hospitalization. Typically, it takes 2 of those, 2 clinicians certified. And that includes children. Think of it this way. I'm a parent, and let's say I have a 10-year-old, and I bring him to the hospital because he's having stomach aches. And I say to them, so I know that what's going on for him is he has, a parasite, and you need to treat him for this parasite and hospitalize him on such and such a ward. Well, they will listen to my input, but then they will do an assessment and determine whether he really does have a parasite or not. It's not up to me to decide what is wrong with my child. I can bring him to the hospital and I can give the hospital information. Or I can call an ambulance and give them the information. But I can't sign somebody away. I can't sign my child away. So just so you know that. In the past that was possible, but not anymore. By the way, danger to others, people being hospitalized under that clause, danger to others, is pretty rare. And that's because typically when people threaten other people, they wind up in jail, not in the psychiatric hospital, even if they're mentally ill. So danger to others is pretty rare for involuntary hospitalizations. Most common is danger to self and grave disability. So a person can be hospitalized for 72 hours for assessment and treatment. So that means that they can be in the hospital for 3 days because they met one of the 3 criteria that we talked about. During that time, they have a right to be assessed and to receive treatment. If at the end of those 72 hours, the staff at the hospital or the psychiatrist still thinks that the person still needs to be in the hospital because they still meet the criteria, they still are a danger to themselves, others, or gravely disabled, then there's a court hearing. In a lot of hospitals, the judge will actually come to the hospital and maybe, in the morning, and the hospital staff will give their opinion of why the person needs to stay in the hospital. And the person will also speak. The judge will ask the person to say, do you agree with them? Do you think that you are a danger to yourself? And if not, why not? And the person has their say also. And the judge is the one to make the decision about continued involuntary hospitalization or not. So it's not a clinical decision. And I remember that when I worked on the assessment team in the community doing crisis assessments, I thought it was kind of crazy that the judge decided. The judge is not a clinician. How does the judge know? And there's some truth to that in the one sense. On the other hand, the interaction here between the judicial system and the hospital system isn't all bad. It's good to have, the judge isn't there as a criminal judge, but rather as somebody looking out for the civil rights of the person in the hospital. So the judge might lean towards releasing the person unless you can really establish that that they meet the criteria. And that used to be very frustrating because I might have a client, I've had clients who were able to hold it together for 10 minutes and present really, really well. I have enough time. I'll give you an example of a woman whose psychosis led her to believe that people were trying to poison her. And as a result, she had dropped so much weight that she weighed like 80 pounds at 5'4". She was dying. She was starving to death. And she was hospitalized as a danger to self. So she wasn't, she was hospitalized for grave disability. She wasn't intentionally a danger to herself. It was her psychosis, her grave disability, that led her to not be able to take care of herself and keep herself alive. So she was hospitalized. And after 3 days, after 72 hours, she appeared before the judge, and she was so lucid appearing. And she said to the judge, I know that Dr. Giron is worried about me. She's so kind, and she just wants to make sure that I'll be okay, and I will be fine. I promise. I'm eating again, and I know sometimes I get a little kooky around food, but really, it's not a problem, and I am eating, and I will continue to eat because I realized that, I lost too much weight. And the judge was, well, of course, this person is entirely lucid, and released her. Unfortunately, that had happened quite a few times with this person. And she left the county, so I don't know what happened to her, but I know that she wasn't cured of that delusion that she was being poisoned. So, but you can also see the side of civil rights here. In the old days, people could just languish in the hospital for a really long time because nobody intervened. And if the judge does decide that the person needs to stay in the hospital because they do meet the criteria, it can only be for another 14 days. So the judge would say, okay, yes, this person should stay in the hospital for another 14 days. So now we're at 17 days, right? The first 3, now 14. And then if at the end of that period of time, the people on the clinicians still think that the person meets the criteria, again, there's a court hearing, and this time the judge can say 90 days, and then 180 days. And then conservatorship is when somebody else is responsible for the person's well-being. And even conservatorship, even in that case, once a year, there is a hearing where the person can contest that. So, and all of that is in the name of civil rights, so that people don't wind up locked in the hospital and languishing. Okay, I'm going to end this series on schizophrenia here. Thanks for watching.